What's up, everybody? Today's episode is another installment of the ongoing New Orleans drummer series, and I certainly have a great guest, an educator, clinician, player, and all-around killer drummer, Ricky Sebastian. Ricky has taught at the Drummers Collective in New York City and presently teaches at the University of New Orleans as well as the Heritage School of Music. But I was able to catch up with both Ricky and another drummer I'm a big fan of from the same city, of course, New Orleans, and Doug Below, who actually studied with Ricky in New York before moving back to Louisiana. So be on the lookout for Doug's episode next Monday. In any case, Ricky and I were able to get into the contrast of two very different cities in New York and New Orleans. Some great stories of playing with legends such as Jaco Pastorius and Rashied Ali in New York in the 80s and 90s, and playing with one of my personal favorites, Dr. John. Plus the benefits from an independent standpoint of studying Afro-Cuban, Latin jazz, and fusion, etc. Definitely a fun talk with a super knowledgeable guy. Before we get into that, shout out to my sponsor, New Orleans Record Press. Are you, your project, your band, your audible conceptual artwork project looking to put out some vinyl? Well, look no further than NewOrleansRecordPress.com for mastering, vinyl coloring, packaging, precision lacquer cutting, electroplating, and all the other wildly scientific aspects of vinyl printing. Plus, they got a real-time quote generator, a quicker turnaround than most in the industry, and you can print smaller runs, such as 100 if need be. So go on over to NewOrleansRecordPress.com for all that info and more. Put down an order. Tell them the Crash Bang Boom podcast sent you. All right, y'all, here we go. Fusion teaching, drum ripping, Latin groove laying, Ricky Sebastian, y'all. Yeah, you're right. Crash Bang Boom.
Crowds go mad with joy. Get the drummer.
Ricky Sebastian, man, how you doing? What's going on?
I'm doing great, man.
Yeah, man, it's good catching up with you. I know I was just telling you, haven't had my former drum instructor, Wayne Moreau, on. I really enjoyed growing up and watching guys like yourself and Wayne and your pursuits with all of the Afro-Cuban and sort of Latin fusion kind of drumming and stuff. And, you know, learning about that really opened up my playing. And so it'll be fun to talk to you about it because I know you've been dabbling in this stuff for a long time.
Look, I don't think I heard Latin. Times have changed a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think I heard Latin music until I was 19 years old.
Wow.
And there was a percussionist here named Mark Sanders back in those days, who's actually back in New York now.
Okay.
And he played something for me one day, and the first thing that happened was I didn't know where one was. So automatically I was intrigued. It's like I'm a drummer, right? If I can't feel one, there's something going on here I need to know about.
Sure, you have to reprogram yourself.
And then the timbale player took a solo, and I was hooked. I was like, I don't know what he's doing, but I'm going to learn how to play like that because it is killing.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was my intro to Latin music. And back then, we didn't have computers.
Oh, yeah.
YouTube, and there was literally no Latin scene in New Orleans,
right,
except for this guy, Mark Sanders, and another percussionist named Hector Gallardo, who's actually from Cuba and is very knowledgeable about the music. So, you know, I found myself hanging with those two guys a lot over the next few years until I moved to New York City.
Yeah.
Just to try to soak up a little bit of what they knew, you know.
I bet.
And we actually played in a group with them, with Steve Mazikowski and Jim Singleton, I think, was on bass, called Caliente. So that was like one of the first. That was maybe the first Latin fusion kind of group in New Orleans.
Wow, what year was that?
This had to be late 70s. Man.
Wow, I was born in 76.
Wow, yeah, this is probably like 78, 79.
Wow, that's amazing.
And we played around town for the next few years, and then I ended up moving away. I think in 1980, I want to say 83, yeah.
Early 80s?
Yeah.
Is that where did you find yourself in New York, having left New Orleans at that point?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Really?
I mean, at that point, I had pretty much played with all the best people here in my career, and Just that wasn't enough for me. And most of my idols at that time seemed to live on the East Coast.
Right.
So it just made sense to me that if I ever wanted to work with any of those guys one day, I need to go where they are.
Wow.
Know?
What was your subsequent realizations that you had in going to New York from New Orleans? Because I myself now live in New York, originally from here. I remember having moved there. It was a shock to my system.
I don't know which was more of a shock, the shock of getting to New York,
right,
or the shock of coming back here 17 years later.
Oh, trust me, every time I come back, I get crazy road rage here because you got to dial everything back, man. Everything moves so much slower here.
Look, I've been back, let's see, about 10 years from the second time I moved to New York, and I still have issues with that.
Yeah.
You know, cars stopping in the middle of the street, rolls the window down. How's your mom and them? It's
right.
like, don't even pull over. It's like, get out of the road already. That's the New York coming out in me.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. It has not helped my impatience having lived in New York now for 13 years.
No, it won't either.
Yeah. Yeah. It is so hard for me to dial everything back when I come back down here.
But I love, and I've always loved the efficiency about New York City.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You know? Man, if you're the type of person that wants to make things happen and wants to get things done quickly, there's no better place.
Yeah.
Things work there.
Right.
They're not dysfunctional like in New Orleans in that regard. Or I say New Orleans, I could say the South in general.
Right.
Although we're like below the South. We're
I know.
Northernmost point of the Caribbean. Right
I think that's a great way of looking at it.
We just happen to be in the United States.
Exactly. I know. So, I ended up, I guess, in 2005 post-Katrina, and it was definitely, like I said, a shock to my system. One of the funniest things that I remember seeing there and, like, kind of working and going to work and commuting and whatnot, I had never seen so many people walk fast.
Right.
Because down here, once again, you don't see that.
No, you don't see one person. Well, you might see one person.
It was me.
Yeah, and it's still me, too. But, everybody, and there's a misconception, in my opinion, that New Yorkers are really rude.
Right.
I don't think that's the case at all.
Uh-huh.
I've had New Yorkers take the time to help me on numerous occasions, whether it's directions or with subway,
right,
whatever. It's just that they're in a hurry, man.
Yeah.
Everybody's in a hurry.
Everybody's in a hurry.
So they come off as being, but I guess rude. But there's a difference between just being rude and not having a lot of time.
True.
And people down here are used to taking in my opinion, way too much time to do everything.
Yeah, it's crazy. So it sounds like you and I are somewhat kindred spirits in this inability sometimes to deal with some of that. But when you moved to New York, man, what was and you started, I guess, getting out there and hustling gigs and whatnot. What did you think of the scene? Was it energizing? Was it an exciting time?
Oh, man, look, that move was probably the greatest adventure of my life.
Yeah.
Okay. And when I started thinking about making the move up there, I had met and became really good friends with an amazing keyboard player, singer, and composer named Delmar Brown, who had come down to New Orleans to check it out down here and spend a little time, and we ended up staying with me for a while. And before I actually made the move, I had a couple of people I knew here that had moved to New York. So Emily Remler, which was a great jazz guitarist, and Michael Polera, those are two people that had moved to New York. Mike's originally from there, but he's been here most of his life. So I started going up and just spending a couple of weeks at a time with friends and kind of starting to check out the scene there at that point. And every time I went back, I knew this is where I need to be.
Right.
Because for me, not just in music, but a place like New York City, if you have the character that you want to see how far you can take it in whatever field you're in, go to New York.
Right.
And you'll find out. And you'll find out quickly.
You will, yeah.
I met other drummers and musicians around my age, not long after I was there. 6 months later, they were gone, man.
Yeah.
Because a couple of things. You have to be really, really good at what you do. And you have to have some money.
Right.
Because when you first get there, if you get there without a gig or a job, and you have X amount of dollars to last,
it's going to go fast.
It's going to go fast, and so you got to start making things happen very quickly. You know? So when I did decide to move there, this guy I was talking about, Delmar Brown, and a drummer that he used a lot, Kenwood Denard.
Oh, yeah, Ken was awesome.
Kenwood's at Berkeley now, teaching at Berkeley now.
Yeah.
Well, they just both happened to be playing with Jaco Pastorius in his band at that time. So Jaco was one of my idols that I wanted to play with someday. So
I bet.
When I learned of that, that was kind of the writing on the wall. It said, look, it's time for you to go.
Yeah.
It's time for you to go up there.
Yeah. So
I basically sold everything I owned except my suitcase and clothes and my drums.
Right.
And I had a place to stay with some friends for 3 months in a loft in Soho, one of those old artist lofts.
Wow.
And I made the move, man. I figured if I can't get something happening in 3 months, then I guess, it wasn't meant to be.
Right. And then within that 3 months, did you start to play with Jaco within that time? Or was that a good bit later?
Not in the first 3 months. I did meet him at that time.
Really? What was your impression of him?
Everything I was expecting. He was just very unpredictable.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very a sweetheart of a guy.
Yeah.
Huge ego.
Yeah.
He wasn't to the point where he was starting to drink and do a lot of crazy stuff yet, you know. But just a real force, man. I mean, a real presence to be around. It was just exciting being around the guy because he was truly a genius, but also the things that he'd done in his career already were just, at his age, pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, for sure.
But that first 3 months, one of the first people I called when I got to New York was Dr. John.
Really?
Yeah, because I had worked with him down in New Orleans a few times, and so I called him up and told him I was there. Told him I had moved, and
had you worked with him prior to that in New Orleans?
Yeah.
Oh, you had? Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, 2 or 3 times when he was down here.
That's awesome.
So he was great. He basically came over to our loft and we jammed, and had dinner one day, and then next thing I know, he'd fired his drummer and hired me.
Whoa.
And I hope that drummer is not still mad at me to this day because, hey,
Right. Desperate times. That's amazing, man. And I've talked about it before on this podcast. The first musical experience that I recall in my life was when my mother brought me to the Jazz Fest and I saw Dr. John. And I remember seeing people moving and being affected by this music or whatever. I didn't even know what it was. It was some sort of audible information that was affecting people and making a move. And I was transfixed by it. And it started at that moment. So I have this unique connection to Dr. John because I feel like that's where my obsession with music started at that moment.
Okay, well, you're lucky you can pinpoint it to one thing.
Yeah, it's really I mean, at least that's the way I remember it. I don't remember anything prior to that, seeing live music,
Yeah,
So that's awesome that you play with him. How is he? He seems like quite a character.
That's an understatement. But he's truly God broke the mold when he made him, that kind of thing. I worked with him last summer, just for one festival up in Wilmington, Delaware.
Yeah.
He's getting up there. He's slowed down a bit, but man, he's still got that vibe,
Sure.
He's still got that vibe. He's still out there doing it.
Wow. Well, man, going back to, I guess, Jaco for a while, once you started playing with him, I remember reading, I think, an interview that you had done, and I was hoping you could retell the story. I can't remember if it was on a gig that you played with Jaco, but towards the tail end, he did something crazy with sticking the bass in the ceiling.
Oh, yeah. That was one of my first big gigs with his. It was like a scaled-down version of his big band. And it was at a famous club in those days called 7th Avenue South. And the owners were the Brecker brothers, Michael and Randy Brecker. And, I mean, the who's who of the New York jazz scene would play in this club.
Right.
So that night of this, I think it was my second or third gig with Jaco. He decided to have 2 drummers this night. So he was teaming me up with Rashied Ali from John Coltrane.
Oh my God!
Fame.
Yeah.
Rashied's still with us, and this is part of the genius of Jaco. I was thinking, well, how is this going to work with two drummers? Especially, I've never even played with Rashied. So I had an earlier gig with a couple of guys from here that were up in New York at the time, Steve Mazikowski and Ramsey McLean, who was a bassist. And I had told Jaco, look, I'm going to be a little late because I had this other gig. So I went early and set up all my drums and everything. So just imagine this. I'm already a little nervous to play with him at this club, particular club. So I get there with my cymbals and my stick bag after hauling ass from the other gig, you know, and I walk into a completely packed club, and they're already playing.
Oh.
So as soon as the song's over, I catch his eye, and he said, you know, so I come on up, and I walk up and start putting my cymbals up. So he walks over and he says, Donna Lee, I want you and Rashied to start off trading choruses. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And that was it. Strap in. We were off, man.
Whoa.
So I'm thinking, well, he's playing sticks. Let me start off with brushes. It'd be some kind of contrast. Mm-hmm. Make a long story short, it really worked great because our styles were so different that and we were very sympathetic to playing together. Like when he was playing the main time and whatever, I would back off and just play some little colors and things, and we would switch off. We would switch hit like that. Yeah. So Jaco just burned this tune to the ground. At the end of the whole, he got sounds out of the bass that night on his solo I'd never even heard him get before.
Wow.
When we got to the head on the end, it was so fast. The horn section kept trying to get in on the melody. Yeah. And they couldn't get in. They'd start it, and then they'd flub it and stop. Yeah. And if anybody knows that song, Donna Lee, the very last phrase is this very long phrase of the song. Well, and Jaco's playing the head the whole time. Right. Well, they managed to all get in on that very last phrase and nailed the end. Wow. And the place just went crazy, man. And after the last song of the evening, Jaco's got all this feedback going on his bass, and he takes it off, and he rams the neck into this. It was like one of these tiled ceilings that are hung with framework, you know. So the material's kind of soft; things can go through it. Rams his bass neck first up into the ceiling, and it's hanging from one of those ceiling tiles. And the feedback's coming out of it, and he just runs off the stage and leaves it there.
Oh my God!
And the whole band's sitting on stage looking at each other like, "Okay, what now?"
Grand finale.
That's how that gig ended.
That is amazing. What a story, man! So you were there. You were in New York for about what? I think it was about 15 years or so.
Yeah.
Over the course of that time, were there any? I mean, I know you played with so many people. Were there any other really? In looking back, really sort of monumental gigs that you played, or any particular thing that you reflect on that you feel like, wow, that was some magical happenings?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some other situations, too. I remember going to see Philly Joe Jones on his 60th birthday at a club called Lush Life in the Village. And he was playing with his group. And I had been studying this guy for years, you know, checking him out with Miles Davis when I was learning how to play jazz. So he was always a really sharp dresser, you know, and he was apparently in an extra good mood this night because it was his birthday. Oh. So he took this one solo just on cymbals. I had never seen, and still haven't ever seen, anybody do what he did that night, man.
Really?
It almost looked like he was making sword fighting moves with his sticks. He's playing under the cymbals, on top, but getting all kinds of sounds out of them. This is one of the things that was great about being in New York. On any given night of the week, almost, you can go out and see some of the greatest jazz musicians and Latin musicians in the world.
Musicians, period.
You know? Yeah, period. Yeah. Period. Another show I went to was an artist I ended up working with for many years in several records. Tania Maria, the Brazilian singer and pianist. And she was performing at a place called the Village Gate. I had been in New York maybe in 1 month. And I went to see her show. And the band started playing, and Tania, after they'd been playing for a little while, Tania walks out in this beautiful gown and this big feathered mask on. And I remember my first reaction when I saw her was, I like this woman already. That mask makes me think of Mardi Gras.
Right.
And then she started playing. It was like, whoa. And I think 3 or 4 years later, I ended up joining her band.
Oh, cool.
And the first day of rehearsals in her house, I had nothing to prepare for this. She didn't give me anything.
Yeah.
We had done a little bit of recording together at a friend of ours, very small MIDI studio.
Mm-hmm.
And that went really well. But I walked into this rehearsal, and she'd just start playing with her whole band. And then she'd say, I'm going to start, and then you come in. Half the rhythms she was dealing with, I didn't even know yet.
Right.
From Brazil.
Wow.
They recorded the whole rehearsal. At the end of the rehearsal, her husband/manager comes over with a cassette, gives it to me, and she said, listen to that and come back tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. So I went home and listened to it, and then I realized I was coming in on the wrong side of the beat on half of the songs.
Oh, no.
Because I didn't know the rhythms,
Right.
and I had never heard the music before.
Yeah.
Well, that didn't happen the next day.
Gotcha. Good thing.
Yeah, I went in the next day and nailed it.
You know, it's funny. I've talked to Wayne Moreau as well about it. When it comes to drum set playing in this sort of Afro-Cuban and Latin style that we're talking about here, I like the interpretive aspect of it because it's not naturally drum set specific music. So you have to interpret how to play those rhythms with the voicings that are on a drum set. So it has this sort of fluid interpretive aspect to it, which I think is really cool.
It does, and that depends on the artist that you're working with,
Yeah.
how authentic they expect you to be,
Right.
in respect to the the true origins of the music. That's why a lot of Afro-Cuban drummers that you see, like Horacio Hernandez or Daphnis Prieto, they always have blocks and bells. I'm not just talking about one bell. I'm talking about more than one. They have an extra pedal on the left side for a bell or a jam block.
Right.
But, because those sounds are integral to that music. And basically what you're doing is you have creative leeway with this, but you are trying to reproduce the rhythms and sounds that two or more percussionists are playing. And in my opinion, that's the main thing that makes playing that music on drum sets so difficult. Because drum set's already difficult from the independence aspect of it. You're trying to do 4 different things at the same time. And if you're a singing drummer, 5, because that's like having another hand. But with Afro-Cuban music, it's like to the 10th power or something.
It really is.
Because just keeping clave rhythm with your left foot and playing grooves and fills over that is somewhat difficult.
Yes.
But try soloing and keeping that going.
Right.
That's a whole nother ball game.
That's crazyville.
Yeah. But you see, for Cubanos, they grow up with this, man. They hear clave. They don't even think about it like which side of the beat it's on, 3-2 or 2-3, like we do in America.
Right.
They don't even. It's much more organic for them because they heard this stuff since they were babies, and they learned how to clap it when they were very young, and it's just part of their culture. So for someone like that, it's going to be a lot faster for them to develop playing those kind of rhythms on the drum set than someone that's not from there. it's kind of similar to drum. You know, one of the things when people in New York found out I was a New Orleans drummer, so many people up there love New Orleans music and that style of drumming, because music and the way you play the drums, it's a reflection of the culture that you grow up in.
Sure.
And we were talking a little earlier about the different rates of speed that people operate on in New York City compared to New Orleans.
Right.
Well, down here, everything's laid back. You know, people talk slower.
Yeah.
They do everything slower.
Yeah.
They, in the middle of July, when they're crossing the street, they even kind of got a little backwards lean going on while they cross the street because it's so hot and humid. So you take all those factors in to consideration, and the music's going to reflect that. There's a way of playing behind the beat here,
right?
But you're not dragging.
Right.
That's very difficult, and that applies to all instruments. Horn players too,
right? Have
a way of phrasing things in New Orleans jazz that are behind the beat, but if you're good, it's not dragging. The mediocre players often slow down.
Right.
It shouldn't, but it's a way of playing the groove, and also we used to call it playing in the crack, where the way you make the rhythms feel, it's not straight eighth notes, and it's not a triplet feel. It's in between those two extremes.
Right.
So that quarter note is so fat and wide when you're playing with that kind of feel that someone that's soloing over your groove, they can put any kind of phrasing in that. Triplets, straight eights, it all fits. So a lot of musicians would come to me when I was in New York wanting to know about that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I started actually teaching at Drummers Collective.
Okay, that's where I was going to go there, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the owners, Paul Siegel, caught me with Dr. John at an afternoon concert in Manhattan. Came back. He's a huge New Orleans music fan. He comes down here every year for Jazz Fest. Well, he approached me about, introduced himself. Told I had heard about Drummers Collective because Kenwood Denard taught there as well. And Paul asked me if I would be interested in teaching a New Orleans rhythms master class. Well, I had never done anything like that before. I was like 25 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and I probably didn't express much interest in it at the time, but I said, "Well, I'll give it a shot, man. I'll think of something to do." You know.
Yeah.
So I gave the first class. It was a big success. Had a good turnout. He asked me if I would do a second one. That one had even more people show up because it was a popular thing.
Right.
And I guess they didn't have anybody in New York at that time anyway, drummers that could really play this stuff and had some idea of how to transfer that over to other people to learn, you know. So after the second class, he asked me if I'd be interested in coming on as one of their instructors, you know, on a permanent basis. So my first question to him was, do I have to be there every week?
Yeah.
Because I'm starting to tour, you know. I just got the gig with BloodSweat&Tears, and we were starting to go on the road. He said, no, man. He says, the bigger names you're playing with, the better for the school.
It's true.
And I thought, wow, I'm going to like this gig.
Yeah.
You know, a teaching gig you don't have to be there all the time for. That's great. So the book that I have out, Independence on the Drum Set, the nucleus of that book started when I was teaching at Drummers Collective.
Oh, interesting.
Because I was never a big fan of method books.
Right.
And one of the reasons was, I'm not going to name names, but I had a teacher at Berklee College of Music who had quite a reputation, was giving me these books on snare drum studies that was really difficult and some of the most unmusical stuff I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
Mathematically, it was correct.
Sure.
And you could learn it and play it, but none of this stuff was anything I would ever play in real life. And I think that's one of the things that turned me off to method books for years to come.
Yeah, that.
So because of that, I didn't use anyone's books to teach at Drummers Collective. I wrote everything out by hand. And so I basically used my own material and came up with a system to teach independence on the kit, because even at that young age, I had realized That's the most difficult thing about playing this instrument.
Right.
And if you can figure out how to teach that to someone in a way that it applies to all different styles of music, then you'd be onto something.
Sure.
So that was a great little school for me to develop that kind of thing.
Right. Interesting, man. And, at some point or another, I believe you, the guy that I'm going to be talking to tomorrow was one of your students who's originally from here and moved to New York, Doug Below.
Oh, yeah, Doug, man.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be talking to Doug tomorrow.
Oh,
So
great,
that'll be fun. I get to both your perspective and his perspective on being, going to New York and back. And then, of course, him studying with you. So it'll all come full circle.
Well, we're talking days before internet and email. I got a letter one day from this guy in Lafayette, Louisiana. I open it up and I read it, and it's this young drummer, and he says, "Man, I have every CD that you played on, and I know you're teaching at Drummers Collective. I want to come to New York. I'm thinking about coming up, and I saved money and taking that 10-week program that you all offer."
Yeah.
So he was so sincere, I wrote him back.
Really?
Yeah, and it was Doug Below.
That's amazing.
And I said, "Man, look, if that's what you want to do, follow your dream.
Yeah.
I'll help you in any way that I can."
That's awesome.
So he ended up staying a lot longer than
the
10 weeks. Yeah. And he did great up there. I mean, he learned a lot. He was hanging with these two Brazilian drummers, so he was learning the stuff that they play from them. And
nice.
I really enjoyed watching him get his career going when he was up there.
Absolutely. That's killer, man. We didn't even really talk about it, but obviously if that's kind of where you sort of found your way into sort of teaching, how did you even find the drums in the first place? How did that start?
Unlike you, I don't have this one thing that happened in my life that I can go back to and say that's my first memory of music that made me want to be a musician.
Right.
Ever since I was a little kid, I was just always drawn to the drums and rhythm.
Right.
Well, I was one of those kids that would sit down to the dinner table, and my parents would have to tell me, stop beating on the table before dinner, because I'd just sit down and I'd be beating out rhythm. So my grandparents noticed this, and they got me I was making, makeshift drum sets with mom's old pots and pans and boxes and
That's
things.
The way it goes.
My grandparents noticed that, and they got me one of these toy drum sets when I was 5.
Oh, wow.
The whole thing came in one box kind of deal, you know.
Yeah.
Well, this thing had paper heads on it.
Oh,
so
boy.
They didn't last a week.
Oh, man.
But it instilled in me, a love for that instrument that never went away. So in elementary school, I auditioned for the school band, and the band director, I was like the youngest guy, and he told my parents, I know this is a small town, but your son is a prodigy. I've never seen anybody like his age that can do what he can do with the drums. And so I definitely want to teach him.
Wow.
So I was very lucky to get really good lessons starting at like around 8 years old.
Wow, that's crazy.
So I learned how to read music and started learning about rudiments, and went on to be in drum lines in junior high and high school, and that whole thing.
Right, same here, yeah.
And I always loved that, man. I think that's the closest thing in America that drummers have as far as getting together with each other and playing together. That material that already exists.
Right.
We don't have a situation, except maybe in New Orleans, like in Puerto Rico or Cuba or Africa, where all these percussionists get together and there's a language that's understood, and they spend hours singing and playing together,
Right.
For me, the closest thing I had to that was drum line. Getting together after school with the other drummers and running these cadences and learning these new songs and stuff. And I used to always enjoy doing that,
Yeah, it was interesting. I kind of got burnt out on it, and same here. I started much later. I don't think until like maybe 13 or 14, early teens, But same thing, it was school band, and then ultimately marching band and jazz band in school, and this and that and the other. But once I started playing drum set, my interest in playing in school bands all but diminished.
Oh, it did for me too. Matter of fact, by the time I got to college, part of the deal was I was supposed to be in the marching band, and I pulled the band director aside because I was on a full scholarship, and they wanted me there for the jazz band. I pulled him aside and said, "Look, I've been marching for like years already.
Yeah.
That's the last thing I came here to do. So
I hear you.
Let me do this. Let me write some cadences, some real slick cadences for your drum section, and I'll teach it to them if you give me an A in marching band."
Nice.
So he's like, "Well, it's an interesting idea, but I don't know that you can write anything. Why don't you, write a couple of cadences, bring them in for me to see sometime next week, and we'll see what we can do."
Yeah.
So I went back to the dorm that night, and I wrote 10 cadences out. Stayed up pretty late doing it because I really didn't want to march, man.
Right.
And I brought them to him the next day, and he looked at me. He's like, "Wow, these are great." I said, "Okay, you got a deal, man. I'll give you an A. But you got to work the drum line for me. But you will not have to be at the games. You will not have to march." I'm like, okay, cool.
That's amazing, man. I had a similar, although I didn't really contribute anything, but I just had a really good relationship with my band director in high school. And I said the same thing. I said, "Man, look, I'm trying to be in bands, and I got this drum set thing. I want to go home and do that, and I'll come to the class, But as far as doing any extracurricular stuff with the band outside of just coming to this class, I just don't want to do it." And he said, "All right, I can see you're passionate about playing the drums, so same thing."
That's cool.
I got the A. He let me slide. Everyone else had to do all that other stuff. He took a liking to me, and it worked out.
Sometimes there are good teachers, man.
Absolutely, man. Well, question: you've done New York. You moved back to New Orleans. At which point did you start teaching at UNO and doing the jazz?
Well, I started teaching at UNO shortly after I moved back here in like 1998 or 99.
Okay.
And been there. Of course, we had breaks due to things like Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah, I ended up in New York because of it.
Right. So, I mean, I definitely have had some breaks in my position there over the years, but it's going on almost 20 years that I've been teaching there. That's
a lot of drum influence you've had then over the course of 20 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot of students, that's crazy.
And, I if that ends up being my legacy, I'm comfortable with that, man. I mean, I'm the drum instructor at the Heritage School of Music as well. It's a free program put on by the Jazz and Heritage Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And we basically teach young people to play jazz. My drum studio there is usually around 15 students.
Damn.
And got 10 drum sets in this studio.
Wow.
And a big bag of earplugs because you're going to need them.
Oh, I bet.
But I'm just working on turning out the next generation of great drummers. Hopefully at least a few will come out of there really doing something.
That's awesome, man. Congrats on that. Question, all the years that you've been playing and everything, have you had any injuries that you've had to deal with?
Yeah. I'm still dealing with some of it. Rotator cuff problems with shoulders.
That's a pain in the ass to rehab.
And yeah, I just had my second one on my right shoulder last year.
Surgery, a second surgery.
Yep.
Oh, damn, man.
And I suspect that the reason I had these tears in my shoulder is from repetitive motion syndrome.
You would think
playing drums all these years.
It's crazy.
And I know other drummers, professional drummers that have some of my peers have had the same type of health problems to deal with rotator cuff.
That's rough, man. Have there been any sort of ergonomic adjustments that you've made since that injury that you've felt has sort of alleviated some of the pain maybe in your playing? Or
not a whole lot, because I really kind of modeled my playing style early on after Tony Williams. He was like my all-time favorite drummer for quite a few years when I was 17, 18, going into my 20s. And Tony really believed in setting everything up to where it was very accessible, where you didn't have to reach far to get to anything.
Right.
And he always believed in keeping your core, the trunk of your body, very centered, and you turn from left to right to reach the floor toms or different instruments that you have. So being that was already kind of the way that I played, even after these health issues, I don't find that I had to really change a whole lot. Now, before I went in and had surgery, I was in a lot of pain in my right shoulder.
Really?
So I was having to try all kinds of things with the ride cymbal.
Yeah.
Lowering it, raising it up high and angling it to, which was kind of like the fad back in the late 80s. Everybody putting the cymbals way up high and with a drastic angle. But I was trying all these different positions to try to find something that was somewhat comfortable,
Wow.
And another thing that a lot of professional drummers suffer with off and on is lower back problems too.
Right.
Man, you think about how many hours of our life we spend on this drum stool, know. So if you're not aware of good posture, and even if you are, you're still susceptible to that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Huh. But it sounds like you're have you been pretty good since the second surgery, or?
Yeah.
That's good.
So
Keep fingers
far.
crossed.
Yeah, man. Because the rehab from that one is probably one of the worst of any surgery you can have.
You realize how much you use it when it's injured like that, and you have to rehab.
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Ouch.
Well, it takes a long time, like 9 months.
Oof. Really?
Yeah. They generally tell you 9 months before you'll be pretty much pain-free and have the majority of your strength back. And some people come out of this surgery and they never get it back. But
Oof.
I think with a lot of people, they probably don't really attack the physical therapy. You have to do that.
Yes, you do.
I think of drummers as athletes.
For sure.
I always have. So that's how I approach things like this. Actually, the surgeon that operated on me for the second rotator cuff surgery, normally all he operates on is athletes.
Wow.
He's into sports
Well, that's
medicine.
who you should go to then, for sure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. Whew. All right, man. I'm going to try to hope to avoid that at all costs, man.
Yeah, well, look, I'm not trying to put the image out there that if you want to be a professional drummer, you're going to have rotator cuff problems one day. That's absolutely not true.
Right.
This affects quarterbacks, pitchers, some drummers, people that do a lot of overhead work with their arms and hands. So it's a certain type of activity that you have to do repetitively over and over that can cause this.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah. Oof. All right. Well, I'm glad you're doing good, man.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it was good talking to you, Ricky, man. And I liked talking about Tony Williams, man. Just to go there for 1 second, his playing on the 4 and More record when he's like 17 years old with Miles Davis.
Right.
Maybe one of these days I'll have to come to you for a lesson and you can decode some of the madness that he was playing. Because when I listen to that, it sounds like drum fire.
Oh, man, he was kicking Miles Davis' ass all over the place, and that's exactly what Miles wanted.
Right.
So Tony, at that period, was a great example of, in jazz, it is not the drummer's job to keep time. It's the bass player.
Right. Yeah, right? Yeah, because he was going off.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, one of these days you can help me figure out what in the hell was going on with some of those
I'd be glad
performances.
to.
Cool, man. Well, thanks for talking to me, Ricky. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Jody.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Ricky for rapping with me. Be on the lookout for fellow New Orleans drummer and former student of Ricky's, Doug Below, next week, specifically on Monday, for the ongoing episodes of the New Orleans Drummer Series. We'll catch you on the next one, all right? Crash, bang, boom.